Welcome to the Mindspace podcast. I'm Joe Flanders. Thanks for tuning in. The Mindspace podcast is my personal, in-depth exploration of the science and practice of well-being. I'm sharing this journey with you because I believe we can all lead happier, more meaningful lives by getting the facts and training our minds. Join me as I learn and share the most inspiring insights about human flourishing from leading experts, because we could all use a little more mind space. My guest today is Sugar Sammy. Sugar Sammy is one of the hottest comedians on the international circuit right now. He's performed over 1,700 shows in 32 countries in English, French, Hindi, and Pubjabi. He grew up and started his career in Montreal, craftily poking fun at the cultural and linguistic tensions in Quebec. In recent years, he's broken through in the rest of Canada, the US, and now France, where he was recently named the new king of comedy. His comedy blends cool charisma, sharp wit, and an immense cultural sensitivity to deliver laughs in an impressive diversity of environments. As you'll hear, Sam is also surprisingly humble, down to earth, and well-adjusted, especially for a comedian. And it was a real pleasure to speak to him about how he writes and performs his comedy, his life as a celebrity, how he approaches social media, and how he sustains his own well-being. If you'd like to stay up to date with all the latest news about the Mindspace podcast, please sign up for our mailing list at mindspacewellbeing.com/newsletter. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please consider rating it on whatever platform you use to get your podcasts. And without any further delay, here is my conversation with comedian Sugar Sammy. First of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
It's really cool that you're here, actually. Appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks for thinking of me, you know?
Yeah.
Could have brought in some real legit people that but thought this was a good idea. I'm happy. I'm on your radar.
Oh, it's really a privilege to have you. So you grew up in Montreal, right?
That's right.
And a lot has been said about your origins in Côte des Neiges.
Yes.
Maybe just tell people about Côte des Neiges, this neighborhood in Montreal, and how it influenced you as a person and as a comedian.
Well, I think every person or comedian, especially, is influenced by their childhood, and where they grew up and how they grew up. For me, it was totally, that's where my parents settled, because that's where a lot of immigrants settled when they came to Montreal. They'd come to Côte des Neiges, central neighborhood in Montreal, not too far from downtown, but, some of the cheapest rent, some of the cheapest retail outlets. Even now, if you go to Plaza Côte des Neiges, there's a plug for Plaza Côte des Neiges. Some people thought it didn't exist anymore. But if you want 1985 prices in 2019, go to Plaza Côte des Neiges. You get t-shirts for like 58 cents. Like, the dollar store is going to close because everybody else is beating those dollar store prices. But I think that neighborhood influenced me because I grew up around so many cultures. So many people who weren't just, bilingual, but trilingual. At least, most of my friends were at least trilingual. They'd speak English, French, and another language. So, I think building bridges was something that I was taught very early on, and it wasn't something I was taught, proactively in any way. It was just, that's how that was survival. So I grew up in a neighborhood that lent itself to that encouraged that. I grew up in a school. I went to schools that would encourage that kind of behavior. And for me, I think it definitely helped me. It helped my comedy travel well. So it was very easy for me to adapt and to write a show for a different culture, a different country, because I came from that neighborhood that allowed me to do it on a daily basis from the age of like 3 years old.
So when I hear you talk about that, I think, okay, yes, so he grew up in a multicultural neighborhood and you speak 4 languages?
4, yeah.
So English, French, Punjabi, and Hindi.
That's right.
And you're fluent in all four.
That's right.
And you do comedy. You can do comedy in all four.
That's right, yeah.
And not just in the four languages, but in the places where these languages are spoken as the norm.
Yes.
Which is, we'll get into that, but incredibly fascinating to me. But so when I, hear you talk about that, I think, okay, yeah, so multicultural neighborhood, but not every kid growing up in Côte-des-Neiges is like an internationally renowned comedian.
Right.
So there's more to your success than just the sort of cultural background.
Yeah. Well, number one, parents from Côte-des-Neiges never encouraged their kids to be comedians. it didn't feel like a viable option. It felt like if you went into that, the whole family would be bankrupt. So I was the only crazy one from Côte-des-Neiges. And I think a lot of it is also, I think the will, to get to learn from different people. I mean, for me, I don't think I could have been friends with all the friends that I've had growing up. I don't think I could have been friends with them had I not said to myself, well, I want to get to know them. Okay, why can't my friend who's Jewish play hockey with us on Friday? Like, why? And then he'd explain to me, and then I'd understand, and it was no longer a question, instead of going, you guys are weird. Which is the behavior of a lot of people, and you see it in Quebec typically these days, where it's like the fear of the other, where it's like, well, if they're not like us, well, then I don't really want to get to know them, and I don't need to be friends with them, and I don't need to do business with them. Can you imagine an economy working this way without wanting to do business abroad and, exporting any of their fine products, exporting any of their culture out there? And, just the thought of that to me is like, whoa, how many missed opportunities in every sphere. So I think for me, one of the reasons that it worked internationally is because I was always very passionate about really writing a show that spoke to people, but not just in a way where they're like, oh, that's interesting, this guy from abroad. It's like, hey, I want them to say, wow, that's interesting that this guy has gotten to know us this well. And how does he know us this well? And how did he? And so that's what I get in France now, because I built a whole show just for France, and it's basically a roast of France, cultural roast of France. And then the way I did it was I spent time there, and I actually immersed myself in the culture, and very quickly identified what makes us different, but what makes them interesting, because I know a lot of people who've come from Quebec, who've gone to France, and the reason why they didn't make it in France is because they took their Quebec show and they transported it word for word to France, and they said, oh, this should work. And they didn't, because the style was different, the language was different, the culture was different. And it was almost like watching someone, let's say you're Canadian, and you're listening to someone talk about, the laws and the cultural traditions of New Zealand. You're like, fine, it's interesting, but am I going to go see this comedian over someone who can really, who's really adapted their comedy to me, who's talking to me, they're talking to me. They're not talking about themselves. They're talking about me. So you're actually taking the time to say, hey, look, I'm making this show about you guys. I'm not making it about myself. And that's, I think, the mistake a lot of comedians make. They're like, no, I want this to be about me. And I'm like, no, I want this to be about the crowd. I want this to be about the audience. And so companies will make that mistake too. They'll bring a product that's foreign to a new country, and their marketing and the product will just be exactly the way it was back home. And
it'll clash with the new context.
Completely. Yeah. Right? But the successful companies are the ones who go, okay, well, this is us, this is them. Now, how do we make this work abroad? How do we speak to them?
So I did see that headline, I think, in a French magazine. Something like the funniest Frenchman is Québécois. Right. So
it took me leaving Quebec to be labeled a Québécois.
Yeah, of course. The other thing that I see when at the end of your video clips on your website, there are people giving their testimonials about your show. And more than once, the audience members will say it's precise. There's something like you're very sharp. I don't mean that in the aggressive sense, but it's like it's very in focus. It's not like generally hitting the mark, like you're really hitting the mark with these cultural references.
Right.
And that's unusual to be able to do that in more than one context.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And you did mention sort of this openness, curiosity about the other.
Yeah.
But you seem to dial it up in a way that most people can't.
Right. Well, I think it's homework. A lot of it is really doing the homework and taking the time and being patient and having that luxury of saying, okay, well, I'm just going to go there, write, test out material every day, see what works and what doesn't. It's almost like you got to master your subject, you know? You know, it's like you're writing a thesis about them. And so you have to really do your research and then cut out the fat and get to, you know, the heart of you know, your subject matter. And I think that's what resonates. It's like when you're really able to say, okay, I understand now because I did all this research. It's like a vacuum, right? You're taking everything in. And then, you know, once you get all that information, you got to take, you know, you got to take what you need and you got to take the precise stuff. So like sometimes I'll just test it on people from that country. I'll say, what do you think about this? And sometimes they'll say, well, a lot of people have said that already. So I'm like, oh, I don't want to touch it, you know? And then I'll, you know, and then I'll say, well, what do you think about this? You know, the next thing. And they'll say, oh, this is so true. No one's ever said that though before. We know, you know, it's like sometimes things we take for granted, someone else is able to identify about us. You know, you know, if someone came in, a comedian from abroad and started talking about the construction in Montreal, I'd be like, well, we've heard it a million times, right? So what's your take on it? Okay, fine. But if they were able to identify something that we've taken for granted for years and then was able to like pinpoint it precisely, we'd be like, ooh, this guy really did his research, you know? Or if they were able to really get the gist of what's going on with like Bill 21, which is, you know, the bill to ban religious symbols in certain contexts. You know, you'd be like, okay, how do you know this? You know, like, oh, well, I've been here for like, you know, 3 weeks. I've been reading up on it, watching your news and talking to people on the ground. You need all of that, you know. You need you need the information from, you know, some sort of news outlet or you know, or the internet or whatever. But then you also need to be on the ground and ask people and talk to them and really get what's at the heart of it, you know.
But you grew up here and you have, you know, friends and family and years of cultural reference, but you pop up in France. Who do you test these things with? So I guess you do like small sets in small clubs, right? But you got to be chatting with people and doing it informally. Who do you talk to in France?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, you start making friends pretty quickly, and then you just go, you know, then you start asking questions like, hey, why are you guys always on strike? What's all the strikes? Hey, if you guys are always on strike and on vacation, when does the work get done? You know, so then they start laughing. They're like, man, how'd you notice that? I was like, well, I'm like, you guys, don't you notice there's always a protest? There's always a strike. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, and you guys do take like 3 months of vacation. I've never seen that. Like, how does this work? Like, how economically, how does it, you know? So I think just having a foreigner ask these questions is funny to them, you know?
This foreigner piece is interesting too, because I feel like, to get into your kind of persona for a second, you're always working the outsider bit.
Yeah.
So you're the Quebecois in France. You're like the brown guy in Montreal, or you're the Anglo in Montreal, or then you're the bilingual or whatever. You always have this outsider perspective.
Yeah.
And which I guess, is that a common thing in comedy? Many people, I mean, comics are typically a bit removed. They have this bird's eye view of things, right? Or is this something that you cultivate specifically?
I think most comics, you know, most successful comics have been people who never quite fit in.
Yeah.
Who are always, you know, working from, you know, a marginal point of view, whether it was in high school, whether it was, you know, there was always that. I think I always felt that way wherever I went. I mean, except in Côte-des-Neiges. And still in Côte-des-Neiges is where I feel like I'm at home, you know. I went to CEGEP at Marianopolis, and I felt like that kid who went from public school, who was in like this private school setting with all these rich kids, and it was tough to fit in the first semester. My grades weren't going well. I didn't make many friends the first semester, and then slowly I started kind of navigating. I think for me, it's always whenever I come somewhere, I show up somewhere, whether it be high school or CJEP or university or a new country. Some people tend to jump into friendships and alliances very quickly, and then they realize, oh, I made the wrong friends. I made the wrong alliances. You ever notice that first semester of university, like, oh, okay, wait a second. This guy I befriended very quickly. It's kind of crazy. I should have stayed away from. So what I tend to do is I tend to kind of stay quiet and stay in the background for the longest time, and then slowly make my moves, and that's in every context, because you want to evaluate everything first. You want to get all the information, and then say, okay, now let's start making some choices, And I think that's a healthy way to approach things. It's also a very lonely way to approach things.
Yeah.
And I feel like for me, in whichever context I've been working in as a comedian, I've never felt part of the clique of other comedians. I've always been like, even within the comedians, I felt like the outsider. So within the comedy circle, so within the Quebec culture, I mean, I have very little, very few friends, friends as comics, and and then I start making them. But the friends I do have are very close friends. So I'm very picky and choosy that way, but it also allows me to like make fun of everyone and not be like, I can't make fun of this person because I'm friends with them and I'll see them again. So it kind of, and sometimes what happens is, and I've noticed this, in many contexts, comedians who grow up in certain circles tend to start sounding alike and having the same points of views, because they start filtering each other. They're like, well, you're not going to say you like Trump, are you? We can't hang out with this guy now. Okay, wait a second. You're not going to say that, Bill 21 is okay. I tend to appreciate comedy also when it comes from when there are different perspectives. Like, I enjoy when there'll be a gala and there'll be like 6 comedians and they're all very different and they have different points of view and different things that they different political allegiances, even though they're on the same show. I find that interesting. I find that fun. And you tend to see that a lot less these days than you did in the 70s and 80s. Everyone's sort of left leaning now in comedy, and everybody's sticking to that discourse because it's safer, because there's not that social media backlash, right? So I find that you're losing that diversity of opinion in the arts.
That's interesting. I do want to spend some time on social media, because it's a very interesting time to be a comedian on social media, right? Back to this thing about feeling like an outsider or feeling at home. If I think about your history of the last few years, you did over 100 shows at the Olympia. And it was groundbreaking because it was the first bilingual show, and Montreal and even Canada embraced you in a way. You didn't feel part of the city, or like that this was your ground zero, your starting point, and this is your home base?
Well, I think the reason why this show was successful here is that a lot of people feel like the outsider here.
Oh, wow.
It's so interesting, right? I think in Montreal and in Quebec, it's very interesting. I think that everybody feels like a minority. Everybody feels like the outsider, right? So the Anglos feel like they're the minority within Quebec. And,
technically we are.
We are, right? However, the Quebecois feel like they're the minority within North America, right? Linguistically and culturally.
And their language and culture are under threat.
Under threat, right?
They're an island in this Anglo-American...
Exactly. Yeah. And then, Canadians feel like, well, we're always going to be second place to the U.S., which is right there. So there's so many contexts within which, someone from Montreal will feel like an outsider.
Right.
And so I felt like one of the reasons this show connected is because what I was going through, a lot of other people were going through, but nobody told this story on TV. Nobody told this story in a pop culture context ever before. This story of someone who you know, feels like a minority within a minority within a minority, you know? So it was, I think that's why it resonated, because, you know, other people felt the same thing.
And would you say it's a different vibe in Toronto or Vancouver? I mean,
it definitely is.
Yeah.
I feel like when I go to Toronto, I was just in Toronto for a layover, okay? And just seeing the diversity in Toronto was great. However, the difference in Toronto is it's not an issue. Mm-hmm. It's normal. Mm-hmm. It's like there is no, oh, wow, this is interesting. Like, what are you talking about? That we've been like, where you been? This is how we've been for the last 30 years. This is normal to us. There's no issue. Like, you'll turn on the TV, you'll turn on Canadian television, where everybody's based in Toronto, and the news anchor will be brown or Asian, and it's not an issue. No one says anymore, how interesting, great, they've been so diverse on CTV and on CBC lately. And you're like, this is just normal now. No one's talking about that. Whereas in Quebec, you know, the fact that Le Gala Artiste, which took place, which is the big awards show, and they did like this photo of all the nominees who were on stage. There was a press conference, and there was not one person of color. It was just a sea of white. And then, you know, people thought to themselves, well, why is this happening? And then, you know, the response was, well, there are no good ethnic actors out there, or it's the public that votes, so there, you know, ethnic comedians aren't as popular as the white ones. I was like, it's a deeper story. That's a symptom of a deeper issue, and the deeper issue is that no one's telling these stories. That story isn't on TV, so you're not getting the ethnic writer, producer, director telling that story, that having that point of view on TV. You know, I left 3 years ago here. Like, I left Quebec 3 years ago, and there's a space that I took up here that no one had taken up, and since I left, no one has taken up.
Wow.
I've left 3 years ago, and I had a TV show, a successful TV show, 3 seasons of it here, which I co-wrote and co-starred in. I had my live show. We sold 372,000 tickets. It's the best-selling first one-man show in the history of Quebec. No one has put it on TV yet. I've released it on DVD, on iTunes. No one's bought the rights for it to be on TV, because if I have a feeling uncut, this would be too much trouble. It'll cause way more controversy, because it's fine in a theater context, but on TV, millions of people watching this guy say these things, forget it. And then no one's taking up that space. It's a very lonely space to take up, because it comes with a lot of backlash, and it comes with a lot of you know, people looking at you in the industry as like, ooh, that guy, that dangerous guy who's talking about these things. You know, if I'm seen fraternizing with him too much, if I post a photo of me going to his show.
Even now. And even in the cultural milieu of Quebec, which is very big and thriving, flourishing, like, there isn't that openness.
Well, there isn't, because if you look at the Gala Artiste, the nominees reflect that. You know, we're still discussing Bill 21, you know, Bill 21, where, you know, religious freedom is under scrutiny right now. You know, you try explaining that across Canada, and they're like, no, you're lying. That's not happening.
It's impossible.
Yeah. And then people forget. People think this is new. There was a Charter of Values 4 years ago. It's pretty much the same discussion, just disguised as something else, yep. Right? So I think the reason why, again, the outsider point of view works is because a lot of people here do feel like the outsider, and I think that's the case in a lot of places. I mean, I go to France, and you know, I think people feel that as well. The difference in France is that the majority doesn't get mad at my comedy. They actually go, well, he's right. He's right. We know. We actually acknowledge that, you know, we have been racist historically. We kind of still are sometimes. Yes, I start my show in France, and I go, I love being here in France. You guys are my favorite Arab country.
Yeah.
And right away that gets a laugh because it's such a loaded statement, and there's so much that comes with it. It's a very simple sentence, but so much in it, right? And it resonates with them because they're like, yeah, geez, no one's ever said that before in our country. They took someone from the outside to say it, and we understand why that's funny.
What jumps out at you when you show up in the U.S. because you've done a bunch of stuff there as well, right?
Well, there's so much. I mean, my next show, my U.S. based show that I've been building, really focuses on the difference between Canadians and Americans. We're neighbors. We're so close, geographically, and culturally. We have some similarities. We consume similar things, but we're so different when you peel everything away. And then when I point those things out, I think the Americans get a kick out of it. And even America's divided. And I talk about how divided it is. It's like the crazy, flag-bearing nut jobs on the right, and then, the crybabies on the left, Like, it's divided, but not in good ways, Nobody's in that center anymore. It's like everything's either a big threat to the country, or on the other side, completely offensive and hurtful, And you're like, okay, how is this country functioning? Because it's like, everybody used to be kind of either center left or center right, but everybody's gone either really far to the left or really far to the right, and nobody's right about this. And then so I kind of identify that, and they're like, oh wow, okay, this guy from the outside is actually talking about those two things, and I'm one of those. I'll critique both sides. So I don't just go critique the right and the Trump supporters. I'll also talk about how the left needs to man up a little.
Okay, let's I want to jump on that for a second, because like many comedians, you could be really mean.
Right.
And particularly I was watching some of like the improv stuff that you do, because you have a lot of that on the website, right? And like straight up insulting people.
I don't know if it's that simple. It's not that bad. There are nuances and complexities to it.
Of course. But so if you're not insulting someone, you're insulting his girlfriend or something. Like it's obviously done in good fun, right? And you're laughing and they're laughing. It's all good. But what's going on in these contexts? Like, what is so fun about you? It's like, and you do have an edge, right? Yeah. I know you as a very nice guy, and so there's a stage persona that I think you're kind of cultivating, and I don't know, I think when I saw you've got the leather jacket, and like you play a bit of a badass,
right?
And people love it. People like to be taken down by the badass,
right?
What's that about?
Well, listen, I think some of my favorite comedians have been comedians who've worn a leather jacket.
A red one, perhaps?
Right? And even some of my favorite artists are artists who've worn leather jackets. So it's kind of, for me, that's kind of an homage to all of those artists that I've always admired. We were talking about, I think, before we started recording, the 80s and how I love the 80s. So, a lot of the 80s was influenced from a lot of the 60s. So, the leather jacket, you think of Elvis, you think of Michael Jackson, Prince, George Michael. Some of the biggest 80s stars wore leather jackets. So for me, it was like the leather jacket was non-negotiable. I had to get a leather jacket. And number two, I think people like to see, especially with comedy, with artists, I think they like to see something where they know there's an element of danger, and they also, and then there's a part of it that's magic. They want to see, how does this man get out of this dangerous situation? How will the laugh happen? Because we trust that it will. It's like a magician. You trust that they will be able to get out. I mean, not, that doesn't always happen. The magician's
going to deliver a wow.
Yeah. When the wow's going to come. When's it going to come? And that's what people pay for. Because otherwise, you're just an asshole doing a mean TED Talk. So
the wow is getting the laugh in the context of that confrontation?
But it's not even a confrontation. A lot of it is just, sometimes when I do roast someone, it's not someone who didn't deserve it. I never, and it's always, I'm very good at dosing, and I think this is one thing you get with experience is you get to learn, well, how much is appropriate? How far can I go? And when I roast someone and when it goes really far, it only goes as far as they've deserved it. Meaning if they were disruptive for 45 minutes and they would never let you get to the punchline and they wanted to make the show about them, the audience is hoping that you're going to rip into them. And they're going to back this, you know, because they've seen this person be belligerent and misbehave. So I'm able to kind of get it. And if someone just makes a mistake by saying something that's inaccurate when I ask a question, well, then it'll be gentle. It'll be a gentler thing, you know? So you kind of, you know, it's there's an art and a science to it. You gotta feel the audience and you gotta feel out what the other person can take, you know? Early on in my career, I obviously made the mistake of going too far or not going far enough, where someone was being belligerent and you ignore them. And then the audience goes, well, this guy should have handled it. Yeah. You know, why isn't he handling it? Isn't he a professional? And then you kind of lose that credibility of not being. You
have to command the room with some degree of dominance or the crowd won't be with you.
Yeah. That's what they're there for. Yeah. You know, that's your stage. That's your audience. You have to not only hold them, but you have to be able to drive them for that hour and a half, whatever it is. And if you lose them, and I've seen comedians lose them, like, you know, early on, and you still see guys, they'll go to comedy clubs and they'll start doing crowd work and they'll lose the audience very quickly. And you can identify the mistakes that they've made, you know? Like, so it comes with experience, trial and error. So I got to say early on, you know, I wasn't always great at it.
So those edgier moments where there's a little bit more aggression, playful aggression, the hook there is the danger aspect. It's like, wow, he's really pushing the limit with this audience member. And it's like escalating, and how does he pull it off and like resolve it with a joke, right?
Well, same thing with material. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff I'm working on now is very edgy, right? So it's always like, okay, we're going into this topic, we're going into the zone, and then you can see the audience getting a little bit uncomfortable, like, how's he going to get out of this? My girlfriend's next to me. She's not going to like this. I'm going to have to pretend I don't like it. I'm going to have to apologize because of what this guy's saying. And then you surprise them with a great punchline, and then you're able to get out of it. And I kind of like that. You know, you're like, okay, you dig a hole for yourself, and then you see how you get out of it. You know, and I think that's why people enjoy that kind of comedy. They enjoy going to a theme park, the roller coaster ride. You know, it feels dangerous, but you trust that the technology and the science and everything behind it is going to get you out of there safe.
Well, that's what I find so interesting about these takedown moments, because it totally depends on the trust. And I'm guessing you're building that trust as the evening goes on.
All right, yeah.
But you don't want to lose that. And you've been doing it for a long time, so you know what indicators to read, and you know how to push the limit without going too far and this kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, with improv, with like crowd work, it's way more dangerous than obviously written material, right? But with written material, it's the same thing. You kind of have to know how to pace your material. Meaning, like, I'll have a set list. And I won't go into the most dangerous stuff right away. Right. It's like a date, you know? You go on a date, the person you're on a date with, you want them, you slowly go into small talk about work, talk about, you know, whatever. And then you test your boundaries on where you can go and slowly build to a point where, okay, I've crossed this line and this was okay.
We are going to talk about Aziz Ansari in a second here. I don't know. Sure. That's where you're heading here, but...
Sure, but I think a show with a comedy show is kind of like that. It's like a date for an hour and a half, and then you want them leaving going, wow, I want to see him again. Yeah, you know.
I wonder if again the outsider status affords you more flexibility there. If you were like I don't know, this is a dumb like 80s reference, but if you were like the captain of the football team, a white guy that everybody loved, and you were just a dick. I don't know if I should say that on this. If you were just mean.
Yeah, it's fine.
If you were just mean, it would come across differently. I heard, for example, Ricky Gervais talk recently about he sees himself as like in the lineage of the court jester. Right. And the court jester's role is to speak truth to power, right, but to do it from the role from within the context of the commoners, right? So he's always cutting himself down in a way, and the joke is often on him, and that gives him a few degrees of freedom to push the limits with people. Right. What do you make of that theory?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's who I am. I think if I was a white guy, I'd be able to kind of get away with what I do anyway. Yeah. There are plenty of white comedians who I love and who cross the line and who have these, points of view where I'm like, wow, how does he get away with it? Some of my favorites historically, Don Rickles. Yeah. You look at Rickles would rip on everything and go so far in terms of race, sexual orientation, just everything, like Don Rickles. I mean, Archie Bunker, All in the Family. You look at that character on TV. This guy had so many flaws, but one of the most likable characters and beloved characters in the history of television. One of my favorite comedians working today, Bill Burr, it always feels like he's angry at everything, but it makes me laugh so much. I think, the way to succeed in being able to pull those things off is always making sure that you're precise in how you pace your material and how you write your material. So a lot of it is in the writing, but a lot of it is in the pacing too. Yeah. So if I have something very dangerous, I'll make sure that I have my next bit will be one of those surefire works 100% of the time bits, meaning that I'll make them forget you make them forget what just happened. You soften it by something that's going to work no matter what, and sometimes I'll do it. If it's really dangerous, I'll put a bit like that before and after, so you sandwich that bit. Yeah. So I think you're able to do it because people don't just remember one joke, right? When they leave a show, they'll remember the general vibe of it. I mean, my new show, I tell the audience straight up now, I go, look, in my show, there's going to be a 90-10 rule. You'll love 90% of it. 10% of it will piss you off. And that 10% will be different for everybody. Now, if I listen to everyone, I wouldn't have a show. What would you rather have? Would you have 100% of an okay show or 90% of a great show? 10% kind of hurt, but 90% was great. I was like, when you try to please everyone, you please nobody. Right. Who do you become if you try to please everybody? Well, I guess you could become Prime Minister of Canada, but so I pretty much tell them that. Sure. I say, look, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. So they kind of know and they like it. They're like, I want this. I don't see this on TV anymore. Everybody's always apologizing before they say something,
So it's interesting because that speaks to kind of the angle I was curious about when I asked you, why do people show up for these takedowns? And or why do people show up for something that 10% they're going to be like really pissed off about? And the kind of touchy-feely thing I had in my mind is like people just love to laugh, and they love to laugh with other people. So I'm just curious about your sense of like why comedy is so important to people, that they'll put up with being offended or being taken down or whatever, because there's something very deeply healing or important or cathartic or something. Yeah.
Well, it is therapeutic. I mean, I love laughing. A lot of comedians, you see them like, I don't really love laughing, but that's not true. Comedians do love laughing as well. And like, I know for me, it's one of those feelings that you can't control. It's one of the best feelings that you can get. And I think people seek that today too. Exercise, like I was saying, sleeping well. And I think a good dose of comedy, nothing feels better. I know, I have a fan base that likes coming out to my shows because they feel like it will be like a roller coaster ride, but they'll come out happier than they left. So I don't know. I guess that's what it is. I couldn't give you more. I mean, I'm sure there's scientific data that kind of will explain it a little bit better. But I think for me, it's that human connection that you can get with someone from laughing. I think you even look at it. When you're having dinner with friends, how much fun is it when it's not all about just sharing feelings and talking about work and talking about the mundane, but you also get great laughs out of it. But I mean, if you could combine both, if you touch people in a deep way and then you're able to give them the laughs, that's great as well.
Yeah, I don't know why you're throwing shadow on sharing feelings.
But I think the combination of it is great. You know, for me, I think the older I get, I think the more prolific I'm getting in terms of my writing, and I think my writing's getting more diverse, more complex, and I'm growing as a person, so it gets deeper. You know, I'm talking about, you know, being a man in my 40s now. You know, I never thought it as a comedian. When I'd watch comedians that I loved, I never thought that would be something that would appeal to me. But you know, I'm starting to talk about. I'm starting to talk about the differences of you know, how I was when I was, you know, in my 20s and what life is like now. You know, that 8 hours of sleep, man. You know, it's very important to me. It's like when I was in my 20s, it didn't matter. You know. And I talk to, and the thing is now, it's like I feel like that guy who's getting a little bit older, and I talk to the millennials like that. You know, you millennials, with your feelings, with your feelings. Back in my day, we didn't have feelings.
So let's talk about that for a second. You do have a bit of a crazy life. At least your work life is crazy. But unlike the sort of stereotypical comedian, your personal life is not a train wreck. You're a pretty low-key guy. I'm just kind of curious to hear about that. First of all, how do you kind of stay level-headed in terms of the celebrity aspect and just the day-to-day grind of working a lot, you know, being in demand and traveling and having to just sustain your energies?
Yeah. Well, I think if I really, really get to the heart of it, it's got to be the fact that I love what I do. You know, I never did it for the celebrity. I never did it for the fame, the money. I never went to seek all of that. I really did it because I love writing jokes and I love performing on stage. I love putting those things together. And I've always just wanted to do that. So when I think when there's no real crazy void, you know, I have a family life that's amazing. You know, I have loving parents and you know, 2 siblings that I love, a girlfriend who I've been with for 6 years, and it's like going so well with her. So it's like all of those things are sort of, you know, to me, the priority. If I can just make sure that that keeps going well, and I keep coming up with material, and I keep being able to do what I do, that's all I need. I don't need to go out there and spend my money and show it off. I mean, it's never been about that. You know, it's never been about that. Like for me, the simple things. I think one of the things that keeps me sane and doesn't keep me going crazy is I never spend beyond my means. And I've never been that cliche of, you know, those celebrities who just go crazy and then they're left with nothing.
But hold on, I just want to challenge you there. You say like you've always spent within your means. But you could spend within your means and have the full range of celebrity consumer goods. Right. Because you make a lot of money now. Right. So meaning you you're humble with your needs.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like once the basics are taken care of, I mean, you don't really need more than that, you know? I mean, like I'm not going to the club and buying champagne and vodka for everybody and you know, having like that $10,000 bill. Like, you know, one of our treats, my girlfriend and I were home, is like, hey, let's go for a morning walk and pick up coffee. And we're like that old couple that just likes going for a walk. You know, so I enjoy those moments, you know. I think for same thing with my family, just going to visit them and making sure that I spend time with them. I think the biggest luxury that I see being at the level that I am is having time to be with the people I love and not just running around, taking care of the necessities. I think time, and the older I get, the more I realize that that's the biggest commodity that you can have is time. You know, I think it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but it's so true. You know, spending that time with everybody, you know, you're never going to get that back. You're never going to be able to get that back, you know, and you realize that the older you get. And so I try to just do that. And honestly, it also feeds my material. I mean, some of it has got to be selfish. I mean, now having a girlfriend, like I told her, I said, this is the only time where me telling you that you're my muse is not a compliment. Like an artist telling his girlfriend that she's his muse. In every other context, music, painters will say it, sculptors will say it, but if a comedian says it, you're in big trouble. So I've been coming up with a lot of material and embracing the changes in my life. I'm embracing being a little bit older, embracing having nieces and nephews, wanting kids of my own, and I've been writing about the difference in your 40s and your 20s, things that you paid attention to, that you didn't pay attention to, that you thought you were too much of a big shot to pay attention to in your 20s and your 40s. You start paying attention. Commercials with buzzwords like fiber. You're like, I need that. Let me get. So I think for me, I think that's the biggest luxury.
So, chatting with other public figures, one of the trappings of the lifestyle is how rewarding, like for your brain, literally, like saying a punchline that you wrote, that you thought about, and then 1,500 people laughing out of control because you just nailed it and people love you for having that. It's a great feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that somebody could get addicted to.
Right.
And the same could be said for putting that perfect, awesome, beautiful picture of my vacation on Instagram.
Right.
You just getting a few likes, or like, this is what our brain kind of feeds on, this sort of social reinforcement. But you're able to do that without it kind of hijacking your brain and making you a slave to it.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
I mean, the social media thing, I think, is definitely not something I'm addicted to. But being up there on stage and telling jokes, I mean, I don't think I'm beyond that trapping. Like, I do love going up there and making 1,500 people laugh, writing that new bit. So,
but the rest of your life is in balance.
The rest of my life is in balance, but I think that's definitely, I wouldn't say an addiction, but listen, if, I was on vacation for 2 weeks and I can't wait to get back up on stage, like I do have that need to, and I wrote so much when my brain was not thinking about comedy. That's when I write so much. I told my girlfriend we were on vacation. I said, okay, no work on vacation, no work. But as soon as I said no work, the inspiration would come, and you can't neglect it. So I'd be at the hotel restaurant, and I'd ask the waiter, "Can I please have paper and pen?" Because I'd leave the phone in the room. I didn't want to have the phone with me on vacation. I'd always leave it in the room so that I wasn't looking at my phone, while I was trying to get away from all that. So I had scraps of paper everywhere. And honestly, I think I wrote so much gold in the last 2 weeks. I can't wait to get up there this weekend and just make sure that I was right about it as well. So it's just stuff that was coming to me from just hanging out, seeing changing my context up. That always happens. Whenever I change up my context and I change my routine up, loads of new material just comes to me.
In a way, you're very lucky, and I don't know if it's luck, you cultivate this kind of balance in your life, but you are to some extent in the public image, right? And with social media, this is more of an issue than it was 20 years ago. But comedians are not having an easy time these days, right? And you mentioned earlier that there's this kind of like boring little center left niche that all the comedians are occupying now because they don't want to get in too much trouble on social media. And there are some comedians that have gotten into serious trouble, right? I think Aziz Ansari just came out with his sort of comeback Netflix show, and the Louis C.K. thing was a major nightmare for a lot of people. Does it concern you, the fact that your stuff is edgy? Are you concerned about offending people? Is it a difficult time to be a comedian? What's your take on what's happening?
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. I think it is a more difficult time to be a comedian, but it's also a better time to be a comedian because historically the guys who were edgier always got, broke through in a different way. Like they built their own new, almost own new model, own new industry. They were always like the Eddie Murphys, the Richard Pryors. You look at these guys, they were always seen as these trailblazers. So it's become easier to be edgy now. So it's kind of an advantage because you could create controversies pretty quickly. So I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm edgy now, Good. All right. That's number one. You get talked about way more. But there is that social media backlash. So a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to be in the middle of that because it is a lot to take. And I've been in the middle of that a few times.
Have you had some kind of social media blowback?
So many controversies. I mean, especially when I did my Quebec show.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole...
I mean real controversies.
I don't mean the crazy sovereignists. I mean real controversies from real people. But no, so whenever, I take a jab at Pauline Marois, or I took a jab at the OQLF, the language police here, huge backlash, crazy amounts of email and media stories and people jumping on the bandwagon, and then it just kind of it snowballs and it becomes a thing on its own. The thing that you have to have when that happens, and that's why I'm preparing for my next show here, is you have to have a very strong team, that doesn't panic while that's happening. So I'm putting a crisis management team together full time for when my next show comes out, because I feel like if you just stay away from social media, well, all of that doesn't really happen, and I think it doesn't affect you as much. I think the key is to really stay grounded while it's happening, stay focused, and then answer in your own comedic tone when it's time to do it.
It is funny because it's hard for me to separate like the Pauline Marois thing and like a Me Too scandal.
Right.
Like these are on opposite ends of the distribution.
Right.
But that might be my prejudices.
Right, I got you.
But playing out here. But
yeah, I think the thing with Aziz Ansari and Louis C.K. is that the controversies don't stem from something they've done on stage.
Right.
It stems from something they've done in real life.
Right. But they're under scrutiny because of what they do on stage.
Right. Well, the thing is, I mean, my personal life has been very clean. So I think it kind of gives me the license to be as edgy as I want on stage, because, no one's going to ever be able to compare and say, well, look at that. He is a jerk.
Right.
It's like, I find some of my favorite comedians are the ones who are like pretty, unapologetic on stage, but like the nicest guys in real life. And I've met a few of those, and I always feel like those artists are the best because, they say, that's my work. They're able to separate their work and their real life. That's my work. And this is what my work is. My work is edgy. It's different. It's like watching a great action film. Like, and then you see the guy who wrote it and directed it, and like, well, that's not how he is in real life. He's not going around blowing up buildings. Yeah. And, this guy doesn't carry weapons with him everywhere he goes. So it's like you have to kind of, and for myself, I separate that as well. I do put my personal life in my work, but obviously, the thing with comedy is, for it to be funny, there's got to be a part of it that's fictionalized as well. So like the punchlines are, misdirected jokes that people don't see coming. So it's always got to be that. I take the piss out of my girlfriend now and her family, but obviously it's not funny to see a guy on stage talking about how much he's in love with his lady and how it's great. It's funnier when you're critiquing your family. So
that's an interesting one, because with the girlfriend, you talked before about building the sort of arc to your set and placing the right jokes the right time. So to build the trust and build the momentum of the show. So obviously there's a huge amount of trust with your girlfriend and her family, right? But so that's an easy one in a way. But I'm wondering, like, when you have this new material that you want to work up now and stuff, does it change the way, like the scrutiny and the social media and just PC culture? And I don't want to be super critical of PC culture. There's some merits to it, and it's obviously a subtle issue, and there are two sides. But are you more afraid to go places now than you were because of this scrutiny around, like political scrutiny around your position on sensitive issues?
No, I think I'm less scared now.
Less scared.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I think, I think also because I've been working in France, and it takes a lot to offend them. They love it. They're like masochistic with it. So I've gotten this appetite to write in this way, you know, and in this way where, you know, it shocks them, but they love it, you know? And I feel like I'm not going to now scale back by coming back to North America with my new show. So, you know, I'm writing with that same fire and that same appetite that I had in Europe. And I, you know, want my audience, as an artist, you want to be better than your previous show. So I want to evolve in a way where they know it's me, but I still surprise them, you know? And that's the tough balance. It's like, you know, every artist has that with their second album or their second special. It's like, ooh, the first one, we love that first one. That second one better be good, right? But you also want to give them something different. You don't want people saying, well, it was kind of the same thing as the first one, you know? And I think for me, it's also, I like challenging what's going on. I like going against the grain. I like going against the current. And it's good because, again, it's a lonely place, but it's also your own lane, you know? You got your own lane to yourself, because it's very hard. A lot of people don't want to get in that lane. It's a hard space to occupy. It comes with a lot of, like you said, scrutiny, potential risks. Backlash, and risks. And, you know, that one tweet, you know, that someone will say, well, I find this guy, you know, this and this and this. And then.
So you think you can push the boundaries of what's culturally accepted more safely if your personal life is clean?
I don't know. I mean, I just feel like I do that. I don't know in general. I mean, you know, I'm hoping most comedians have a pretty clean personal life, but as you can see,
right?
You know, with Bill Cosby and all these others.
Not to mention Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby.
I mean,
yeah. He's the only one who's been convicted. You know, so yeah. I mean, I don't worry about it because I don't have anything to worry about. But I don't know what the other guys are thinking. You know, I mean, I'm sure when the Me Too movement happened, everybody started going through their Rolodex and, you know, going through their phone book and be like, what did I, you know, like kind of just reliving their past 20 years and seeing if there's anything to worry about. But I mean, for me, I think I've always strived to make my personal life so, you know, peaceful and I think that's one thing that that I always seek. If there's anything that I strive to have, is keeping that balance at home, and nothing more. And I think for me, you know, I think if I did have a crazy personal life where there's criminal activity involved, yeah, I probably wouldn't be doing this kind of comedy on stage. Actually, if you put it that way, and if I analyze it that way, okay, if I had this crazy personal life, would I be doing I don't think so. It's, you know, because then, yeah.
Well, I mentioned this earlier, and I could be wrong, but I do have the sense that you get away with pushing the boundaries because you're a nice guy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because most of the time when I'm on stage, I'm just having fun. Yeah. And, you know, I meet every fan after the show. So I stick around, I meet everybody. And, you know, my only goal is to make everybody laugh. You know, and if they get something out of it, great. And then, you know, when I go home, I'm just a regular guy, you know. I'm just a regular guy when I go home, you know. And I think even my opening act was like, we toured Quebec for like 4 years, and he was like, this is actually the most boring tour in Quebec history. He was like, because we'd finish the show, we'd go back to the hotel room, and it was myself, the security guy, my technical director, and my opening act, and we just go to my hotel room, play poker, and bring like a big bowl of veggies from the grocery store, and like I'd have tea because I didn't drink. And then he was like, man, officially voted the most boring tour on but it's because I actually do it for, I never did it to pick up girls. I never did it to have the lavish homes and cars, and I just did it because I love doing it, and I just want to keep having the luxury of just doing this and nothing else, and not have to take any other job, and even any other kind of job in TV or film or in that I don't want to do. So I always am very patient with my career too, because I didn't blow all my money away, and I just pick and choose the things I really want to do that I'm really passionate about, because I always feel like if I am truly passionate about it, it will succeed, and that's where my passion goes. Man, people are gonna listen to this and go, this guy is boring.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, probably all he talked about was 8 hours of sleep and tea.
So maybe one last question, if you don't mind. I know we're getting on past an hour here.
Sure.
What advice would you have for someone that wants to be successful in a career? It could be, in show business, but also doesn't want to go crazy.
I think you got to work on yourself before you get to that level. So make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Really ground yourself in your real life, and do it for the right reasons, especially in this business. If you're doing it for the fame and the money, this could be a long, long road, because the percentage of people who actually make a living doing this is so minute. You have to be very patient. I mean, this is my 23rd year of doing comedy, and for the first 10, I didn't make any money doing it. But you got to love the process, and there are no shortcuts. People always want the shortcut for everything. Working out, diet, exercise. Give me the shortcut. How do I, it's what's gonna save you is building it long term, and building it for real, and building a real foundation in your life and in your work. So work hard, be consistent, and always make sure you're giving your best, because it'll lead to great things,
You are boring.
Yeah.
How do people work on themselves? You're saying get in it for the right reasons?
Yeah, get in it for the right reasons. Because if you can only get into this business if you love it. And I mean, love it when it's hard, Like, not love it when it's great, because everybody's going to love it when it's great. You got to love it when it's hard. You got to stick to it when it's tough. That's the ones who usually end up making it, is the ones who stick with it when it's tough and work on themselves and evolve every day. Meaning they get better at every aspect of not only their work, but their lives every day. They improve. They look at improving themselves every day. If you're not growing, well, then you're getting worse, because all these other people who are your competitors, because in comedy, it doesn't lie. Your competitors will surpass you. The guys who keep working at it, who get off stage and go, okay, what did I do wrong? How can I improve this? And how can I make my next set better? Okay, I figured it out. This is where I went wrong. And even get outside advice, ask other comics, why didn't this work? Ask someone you trust. I mean, I think that's always essential, is working on it. Because I've seen guys in this business who've been doing the same set for years, but not getting the laughs, and keep coming back with the same set and not improving on it, or barely improving. And I'm like, what are you doing this for? And a lot of it's different reasons. It's either, I'm doing it because I want to be an actor and this might be the way in, or sometimes it's just for that feeling of belonging to the other group of comedians. So you just kind of show up, you do your set, you get off, and you talk shit about everybody else, and you're in the back of the room, and it's like, hey, we have that sense of belonging. It's, how they say it's lonely when you're at the top. It's kind of like the guys who do make it, like, end up touring and leaving, and they're not part of the group anymore because they're off to other things. Well, some guys, for some reason, want to hang on to the group, and don't want to leave. So there's that sense as well. And when I come back, and because you still jump onto these open mics, and you jump onto different shows to try to test your material. I do that all the time when I'm back home. And you'll see guys who've been working for years who are doing the same thing, and they're in the back of the room talking shit about that new kid who's surpassing them, instead of going to the club, doing their material, improving on it every day, going back home. I mean, I was always the guy. I'd come to the show, I'd do my show, and then I'd hang out with the fans, say hello to them, go back home and start working on the material again. Like, you have to have that sort of work ethic and obsession with it as well. I think.
So we're well past an hour here, and that was actually really interesting. I appreciate everything you said. I don't want to use up your voice too much. You got a lot of work to do with that voice of yours. So before I let you go, tell us what's coming up for you. You're heading off to France. You're back and forth. You got all kinds of stuff. So tell us what you're up to and how people can learn about what you're doing. Okay. Well, I have some secret shows in Montreal. So all of the Montreal listeners, make sure you sign up to my website, sugarsammy.com. I do secret shows all over the city. These very cool, intimate, underground shows, 100 people, where I'm really testing my material for my next show. Lots of fun. These shows are the most fun that I have. Then I'm going to France for Incroyable Talent, my second season. I'm judging the French, which is great to get paid for something you love doing anyways. And this is the French version of America's Got Talent. That's right. And you're the Simon Cowell character, right, which is incredible. That's right. So again, I'm playing that role. So and then cross Canada tour. Everything but Quebec. So from September 1st till October 12th, coast to coast, and then touring France in the fall. Yeah. Wow. So, and all info at sugarsammy.com. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you. And good luck with all those exciting activities. Thank you. All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Mindspace podcast. I hope it was inspiring. If you feel the world could use a little more Mindspace, please consider supporting the podcast. The best way to do that is to leave a review on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen, or share your favorite episode on social media. Thanks, and be well.